G'day everybody, Nick Dinger here again for another VB.NET 2013 tutorial. We are looking at the second part of the databases tutorials. So in this particular video, we're going to look at actually creating the database. We're going to be looking at connecting to it, getting information from it, and finally sending a little bit of our own information into the database. So if you did skip over the last video or you stumbled upon this one as your first view, go down in the description. I've put a link for an example database so you can download that and follow me as we code so you can do it. Now, what we're going to do is we're actually going to split this into a couple of extra videos. This is going to be a 5-part series. May have mentioned 4 parts in the last video because I initially recorded this video and it took 50 minutes. So I decided to split it up a little bit and save you from listening to my voice too much. I'm going to stick with a console application. If you would like to make a Windows Form application, you're welcome to. It just means that anytime we display something to the screen, or we display a menu, you're going to have to try and make your own things for that. But any of the code to do with the database, reading information or inserting information, none of that will change. Okay, so let's go to console application. I'm going to call it student marks. Let's click OK, and let's get started. Now, before we do any coding whatsoever, we're going to get the database and we're going to insert it into our program. So before I do that, I'm just going to explain there are 2 ways in which you can connect to a database. The first way you connect to a database is if it's on a server somewhere out there in the web or on a network. If it's running on an SQL server, an Oracle server, a MySQL server, things like that, you would connect to the server and you would ask for a database. And then that server would give you complete access to the database, if you had it, that is. The second way you can access a database is if it resides on your hard drive or next to your project, excuse me, then you connect to the database management system and you tell it which database you want to open up and where it is. So it's essentially the same thing, but the whole idea is you are actually creating a connection between your program and the database management system, not the actual database. You will talk to the database management system and it will communicate with the database for you and vice versa. The database will have to go through the DBMS to communicate with your application. So before we set up any code, let's insert the database into our program. So go to your Solution Explorer, and I'm going to open up the Properties panel as well. I want you to right-click on your project name, go to Add, Existing Item, and go and find where yours resides. So mine's in Documents, I know that. However, it's currently filtered to VB code files. Let's change that to All Files. Scroll down, grab the Student Marks database, Add, and there it is in your project. One thing I want you to make sure, the reason I have the Properties panel is because this setting right here, copy to output directory, this needs to either be copy always or copy if newer. I think copy if newer is actually a better setting to have because it won't override any changes you make and it means it's going to be a bit quicker to compile your program in the future. And what that's going to do is every time you press play and it makes your executable file and puts it in the debug folder, it's actually going to take a copy of student marks and put it in your debug folder alongside your executable. Right? It's really important that we do that because then we can use just a direct link to the database file rather than an absolute, and I'll talk to you what I mean later on. So let's get to the coding. Personally, I like to set up all my subroutines that I'm going to need for my application for just this video, I suppose. And let's say the first thing we're going to do is connect to database. And we're going to leave them blank, no code whatsoever. Second thing we're going to do is disconnect from database. If I can type. We're going to have a menu in there as well. We're also going to be able to view students in the database. And finally, add a student to the database. All right, we're going to limit it to this. In the next video, we'll do a few more things, but this is going to be enough for this video, I think. All right, let's start with sub main and let's get cracking, everybody. First 3 things we're going to do: connect to the database, show the menu, and then finally we'll disconnect from the database. So, connect just there, menu just under there, and then disconnect right there. So it's important to note that if you ever connect to a database, make sure you disconnect from it. Otherwise, you're going to have lots of active connections in the background. It's a bit weird. Okay, and realistically, the first place to start, I think, would be to connect to the database. Let's add that code in. So let's scroll up to that bad boy, connect to database. And before we add any code, we're just going to add a comment, the first thing we're going to do is build a connection string. All right, and I'll explain what I mean by that in just a moment. But the first thing that we're going to need is a variable up here, which is going to maintain an active connection to the database manager. All right, and I'll explain what the active connection is used for soon enough. Let's call him connection as an OLEDB connection. So it represents an open connection to a data source. That's probably the easiest way you can say it. So maintain the active DBMS connection. All right, let's add a bit of code and just connect to database. So what we're going to do is we first of all need to build a connection string. So what that actually is a connection string tells you what DBMS you are going to be using, because there's lots of different ones you can use. We're going to be using Microsoft's ACE DB, okay, which is essentially the new version of Microsoft Access. And then we're going to tell it what database we're going to open up. All right. Now, if you would like to know, if you don't want to use Access databases in the future, there is actually a website for connection strings, and I'll put that in the description of the video. I'd suggest you go have a look at it, because there are hundreds of connection strings that you can check out that you can utilize. But for right now, let's set up our connection string. So we're going to go connection equals a new OLEDB connection. In brackets, we don't want to specify no parameters. I want to specify a connection string parameter. Because it's a string, we put quotes around it, and the format goes, we type in provider equals, and then we put what kind of DBMS we're going to be using. Now, again, you're going to have to look at the connection string website to figure out which ones you want to use, but this one is Microsoft.ace.oledb.version 12.0 and a semicolon. Okay, so what that's effectively saying there is use Microsoft Access's OLE connection. All right. Then we have to specify the database that we want to use, or the data source, it's also known as. Okay, because this string is getting a little bit long, I actually want to continue on the next line. So what I'm going to do, just before the bracket, put an ampersand, hit enter, and I'm going to continue typing down here. Then you go data source equals whatever your name of your database is. So studentmarks.accdb and another semicolon. All right, that there is your connection string. So again, you provider, sorry about that. Provider is who you're going to be communicating with, and data source is what database you want to communicate with. Okay, that's effectively all that is. You then have to open the connection. Watch out, this one's tough. Connection, open. It's tough stuff, I know. This is going to be where you hit any errors if for some reason the database doesn't exist, or you've made a typo, or the provider doesn't exist, things like that. Okay, we can actually hit play now and try it out and make sure that this works. But I'm going to just warn you quickly, I'm going to get an error, and I'm doing it on purpose. So let's hit play. It's going to hit this line. Let's break for a second. Or let's have a read of the message first. It says, the Microsoft ACE OLEDB provider is not registered on the local machine. Let's break for a moment. It's bitching about this. VB does not know what Microsoft ACE OLEDB is. Okay, and that is a bit of a problem because we need it to be able to talk to the database. The issue doesn't reside in the fact that I have not got Office installed, because I've got Office installed, which includes Microsoft Access. If your Office does not include Microsoft Access, you need to go in and download the Access Runtime Library. Again, I've put a link for it down in the description, so chase that down if you want to go and download that and install that. Now, the second thing, the reason I'm getting this error is because I know what version of Microsoft Office I've installed. Now, I don't mean Microsoft Office 2013. I have installed Microsoft Office 64-bit, okay? And my program is running as a 32-bit, and they don't match up properly. Okay, so if you get this error, it's just a matter of going to your My Project settings over here. Okay, you go to Compile, and then where it says Target CPU, you change that to whatever one you need. So x86 is 32-bit, x64 is 64-bit. If you know what version of Office that you've installed, pick the option which matches the version of Office. So if it's 32-bit version of Office, select that one. If it's 64, select that one. If you don't know, okay, just try any CPU, x86 I should say, run your program. If you get the error, select 64. Okay, now if I press play, that's the exact behavior I would expect from my program. It's connected and then it's closed my application. It's exactly what we want to happen. Okay, if you have any more troubles, put a comment down below and I'll try and help you out as best I can. Again, if you don't have Microsoft Access on your computer, check the description of the video and download the runtime files for it. Okay, let's have attack this sub right here, disconnect from the database. So let's stop the connection. Again, watch out for this one, connection.close. She's a toughie, I know. Alright, that there is done. If we press play, it should flash in front of our eyes and not crash. Perfect. Let's do the menu. So what we're going to do is just display a menu of text. This is going to be where, if you have a GUI program, you're going to have to replace it with maybe buttons, different forms, or maybe you just have everything on one form, and you just let me continue and you can have a look at it later. Okay, first of all, I'm going to make a variable which stores the selection from the menu. Let's dim selection as a char. If you've ever watched my previous videos, you're going to know exactly what I'm going to do. We're going to do a post-test loop, so a do loop until selection equals X, because I think X is quite a nice option, because X sounds like exit, and this is where we draw the menu, right here. Okay, there's going to be a lot of code here, so if you need to pause midway, please do so. So console, clear, so we've got a fresh menu. Console, right line. Okay, I'm going to copy that because I'm lazy. Please select from the following options. Okay, going a bit French, dear. Okay, let's do an empty right line. Let's do A is for view students. Let's go view all students. Okay, the next one is going to be B for add students. I've still got to stop capitalizing those. Let's do another blank one. And let's do X for exit. Then finally, let's do right selection, because it looks pretty. Selection equals console, read line to upper. I'm a big fan of read line as opposed to read key, but you can choose whatever one you want. And the to upper is going to make sure that we only ever have to check for capital A, capital B, or capital X. Okay, let's do a quick selection. What did they select? Hey, what do you reckon? If selection equals A, then what are we going to do? Well, we're going to view students. Else if selection equals B, if you want to do a case statement, by the way, you're welcome to, then we're going to add a student. Okay, if they selected X, then the loop should take care of them exiting the program. All right, save. Always save, 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 save. Okay, this is done. This is my entire menu complete, and it's going to take us through the view student and the add student subroutines and do all the work for us. Now, here's the hard part. I'm going to teach you how to communicate with databases. We're connecting to it. So the first thing that happens in our program is we connect to the database, create the connection, and we don't close the database until we've finished with it, until the end of the application. But we're going to come down to view students, this bad boy right here, and we are going to communicate with the database for the very first time. So to communicate with the database, we need to use SQL. If you watched the previous video or you know SQL, then we're going to use a select command for this. So what I like to do is build the query in a string. So I'm going to dim Q as a string, Q for query. And the way you get all of the records from a table is you use the select command to get things, asterisk to get all of your fields or your columns, and you go from and then the table name. So select all the fields from student. And because I'm not students, sorry, was the name of my table, stupid me, and then we're going to execute the query. All right. If you want more information on the SQL commands, I've put a link down the bottom for some really basic introductions and tutorials. Have a look through them. Some of them are fan-bloody-tastic. Some of them may not appeal to you, but have a look at them and tell me what you think down below. Second thing, let's execute the query. So we're going to dim what's called a command, okay, as a new OLEDB command. All right. Just open a bracket, and we're going to use the third constructor. It wants text, which we've got, which is Q, and it wants a connection, and that's why we need to maintain an active connection, because each time we query the database, we need to send that connection. The reason you have to send a connection is because you may have 1 or 2 or 3 databases open at a time. So you would have to maintain separate connections for each. So let's give it the query and then give it the connection. And you're going to see this a lot, people. We're going to use this one line of code so many times it's not funny. Now, the next line is quite interesting. When you query a database, it does not send data back to you. What it does is it sends back a resource, or probably better said, a link to your data, which still resides in the database management system. You then have to read the data out one record at a time, and you use that using a data reader. Now, if your query is asking for data, then you will use a data reader. If your query is inserting information into a database and you're not expecting anything to be returned, then you don't need to use a data reader. All right, but for the moment, we need to use a data reader. And how do we execute the query? Because this isn't actually executing it. What you have to do is type in cmd.execute, and you need to pick out one of these ones here. So the two that we're going to use in this video are execute reader, so we can read stuff out of the database, and execute non-query for when we insert things into the database. So I'm just going to get rid of that for the moment because I need to capture the reader resource first. So let's dim a reader as a new OLEDB data reader, and he equals the command execute reader. Oh, whoops, get rid of this new keyword. What am I doing? CMD, there we go. All right, sorry about that, everyone. So dim a reader as a new reader, as a reader, and it equals the execute reader. So this query is going to be executed, and the resource this produces is going to be jammed inside this variable for us. And then what we do is we ask each time for the next record. Okay. Before we do anything with the reader, let's draw a nice clear label. Label for the columns. Okay. So first of all, let's clear the screen because that's always nice. And I'm about to do something really, really new. I've never used this prior to this video, and it's called formatting. Woohoo! Conditional formatting, I think it is. But anyway, I'm just going to type it up quickly. So 0, 1, 2, that's minus 20 as well, and then finally 3 at minus 20. Okay, what this actually is, it's not going to draw these things to the screen. What it is, it's saying each element, so the 0 element, the first element, the second element, and the third element have these many spaces allocated to it. So the first one will be 5 spaces, the second one will be 20, and then so forth, 20 spaces and 20 spaces. How do we know what each column is, so each element? So the 0 element, what is it? Well, it's going to be just the word ID. So I'm going to put ID after a comma. The second element is going to be the heading which says first name. So I'm going to put first name after another comma. And we're going to keep on going like that. Comma, last name, comma, DOB. So what I'm saying is that we're going to have ID, and since it takes up 2 spaces, there'll be 3 blank spaces after it because we said it's going to take up 5. First name, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 characters, followed by 12 blank spaces after it. And what this is going to do is going to allow us to have a nice, neat set of columns. Okay? There'll be no one character to the left or one character to the right because a name is longer or shorter, and etc. These ensure that everything is formatted. Why have I got a comma there? Oh my God, people, I'm sorry. I'm doing great today, aren't I? All right, now we've got the headings at the top. Let's draw each student to the screen. And we use it using a while loop. So while the reader can read, which what it does, read asks the reading resource, do I have another record? Yes, if you do, no if we've run out or there have been none to begin with. So what are we going to do? Well, we're going to draw the student's details to the screen. First of all, what I want you to do is copy this bad boy up the top here. Bam. For ID, we're actually not going to write ID because that'll write the word ID, not the student's ID. All right. What we are going to do is we're going to do reader, open a bracket, and then put, see how reader is asking for an index or a name of the column. So what's the first column in our database called? It's called ID. So you put in quotes, reader ID. And you do the same thing for first name, last name, and date of birth. Now things are starting to get a bit messy here. So I'm just going to press enter and go to the next line. And I'm going to do the same thing for first name. Go back up there. Last name. And then date of birth. And a double bracket because there's a bracket up there. Now, if you don't know what the hell I've just done here, you can effectively write this all on one line. You don't have to put things on new lines. It's just I think this looks a bit neater in the long run. You can read it. It doesn't go off the edge of the screen, etc. Now, before you finish up and we test this bad boy out, you always close off your resources. So the reader.close at the end. Never, ever forget to do that, because if you do, you're going to have an extra resource running in the background. So let's hit play. Let's test out the View Students function from the menu. Hopefully, it's all going to work. So it's connected to the database already because it's gotten to the menu. All right. Can anyone guess what's going wrong? I can, because I forgot to read line. However, I'm not going to put the read line here in View Students, okay? Because we're actually going to use View Students later on for a couple of other functions. So what I'm going to do is put a read line just here. So press play. Holy crap, there's our data. Now, setting you a challenge, the date of birth is coming up with a time. I'm going to leave it up to you to cut that time off the object. It's entirely up to you. We're back to the menu, and we can exit, and life is good. Okay, so that's done, everybody. If you need to pause the screen right now to copy up the code, do it, because I'm going to continue, and we're going to add a student to our database. Okay. Same sort of thing. We are going to talk to the database using SQL. However, before we can insert a student to our database, we need to know three things about them. We need to know their first name, last name, and their date of birth. We don't need to know their ID because the database is automatically going to generate that for us. So, before we even set up our query string, our queue, we are going to gather the student info. So let's dim first name as a string, dim last name as a string, dim the date of birth as a date. All right, and all of this is going to come from the console. So let's ask the user. Clear the console, right to the screen, enter the details for the new student below. Okay, ask the question for their first name, just like so, and then we will readline the first name, console.readline, radline. Same thing for last name and same thing for date of birth, sorry. Copy and paste, last name, don't forget to change the variable here, last name, and then date of birth, down here, date of birth. Okay, if you need to pause and finish that up, do it now, because I'm going to build the query and we are going to talk to the database. So, build the query string here. So let's dim queue as a string. If you watched the previous video or you know SQL, the command to add data into a database is insert into, then the table name, students. And then you need to have brackets, and in these brackets you specify the order of the columns. So the first column will be first name, second will be last name, and third one will be date of birth. Okay? These need to match up with your database's columns. So if you've got a capital F on your column, use a capital F. Otherwise, use a little f. The second thing we need to specify are the values. Now, before I quickly use these variables, I want to show you what it's going to look like. So we've got insert into student, and then you do values. And then what you have to do is put apostrophes around them. So if my new student is going to be called, I know, Stephen Pills. Great name. Okay, you need to actually put apostrophes around all of the different values. So first to the first, 13. Okay, anything that's a string or a date, you need to put apostrophes around it. Numbers don't take the apostrophes. What we have to do now is replace Stephen with the first name variable. So what I do there is I put quotes. In between the quotes, I put 2 ampersands, and in between the ampersands, I put the variable name. Sound confusing? I can imagine it probably does. So, 2 quotes, 2 ampersands, and put last name in between them. Same thing for the dates. Just here, that's a dodgy date. 2 quotes, 2 ampersands, and then date of birth in between it. Okay? Now, I'm actually going to put a breakpoint on this bad boy, and I'm going to show you what this string ends up looking like, just so you can see it for your own eyes. We then need to execute the query just like we did before. So dim cmd as new OLE db command. In the brackets, we give it the query and the connection. So as I said, it's exactly the same as the last one. There's no difference there at all. We're then going to execute the query. However, we don't need to read anything from the database, so you just do cmd.execute non-query. All right. If we run this bad boy, hopefully it's going to insert the student into our database with the names and the date of birth that we give it. So let's hit start. And just remember the breakpoints in there. Let's view students first. Bobby and Jill are still in there. Let's add a student. Let's Stephen Pills, 1st of the 1st, 13. All right. Breakpoint, that should have happened. Don't stress, people. I haven't hit an error. Okay. Right now, Q is nothing, so let's press F11, so it does one line of code. And if you have a look down here, insert into students, the first name, last name, and then the date of birth. The values of that are Stephen Pills, 1st of the 1st, 13. Really, really important that you understand the structure of query or SQL, because you need to know it for databases. Let's press play. All right, let's come back to the menu, so hopefully saying it's done. Let's go back to view all students, and there's Stephen Pills. All right, here is something really cool. Let's exit the program, run the program again, view all students. Stephen Pills is still there. Because I'm working on a database, databases automatically save your stuff for you. You don't have to call a save function or anything like that at all. SQL is all you need. Okay, I'll scroll up a little bit and zoom out so you can see this whole thing in one hit. Hope you've enjoyed this video, everybody. I'm going to leave it there. In the next video, we're going to have a look at looking at students' individual marks. So let's say we want to see Bobby's marks overall. We'll select Bobby and we'll see all of his marks. We're then going to look at adding new marks to each student and deleting existing students from the database. Okay, this is Nick Dingle signing off. I hope to see you in part 3, everybody. Like, subscribe, talk, tell me what your opinions are, everybody. I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching. Bye.